Even the US, home of the world reserve currency, and its currency is not trusted like it used to be because we have a debt addiction. Left, right, and center has ruined our country since 1971. So that's the real problem. All the rest, even the debate about Bitcoin, with all due respect, is fog because we're already terminally ill. And no matter what we do with cutting spending, it's too late now, in my opinion. Doesn't mean the end of the world, doesn't mean the end of the dollar. It does mean more centralization masquerading as libertarianism or America firstism. But whether their intentions are good or bad, it's just fog because we're broke.
Welcome back to another episode of the Collapse Life podcast. I'm your host, Zara Sethna, and if you've been paying attention, you know the financial world is rapidly changing. And one of the most head-spinning changes is how institutions that once laughed at Bitcoin are now championing it. Governments that warned against it are now embracing it, and somehow the very thing that was supposed to challenge the system is being wrapped into the establishment it was designed to disrupt. So, what's really happening here? Today's guest has been examining these power plays long before most people even noticed them. Matthew Piepenburg is a partner at von Greyerz, a veteran financial analyst, and one of the sharpest minds when it comes to debt cycles, currency debasement, and the hidden mechanics behind centralization. He recently wrote an article titled Bitcoin, Desperate Times Require Centralized Measures, which lays out a case that might make you rethink everything you thought you knew about Bitcoin. Matthew, welcome to Collapse Life.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here and looking forward to shuffling through some of these thoughts with you. So we have a lot to cover.
Absolutely. We could go on and on, but your recent article just brought up so many interesting topics and put a really interesting perspective on it. So really, I would love to focus on some of those and unpacking them for people.
Sure.
So let's start with just this narrative shift around Bitcoin's role in the financial system. You laid out in the article how just a few years ago, Larry Fink, Donald Trump, they were calling Bitcoin a scam. And now they're both out there actively promoting it. So is this a genuine shift in how they're feeling, or was this something that was always destined? Was Bitcoin always designed to be absorbed into the system?
Yeah, it is an absolutely essential question. And, I've been looking at this from different ways. I can't take credit for putting all the dots together by myself. I've had a lot of help from a group called the Black Swan Capitalists, guys like Francis Hunt in South Africa, folks like Luke Groman. Luke Groman's done an interesting job. And by the way, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm anti-Bitcoin or mocking Bitcoin investors or Bitcoin speculation. I have a lot of very good friends who are very pro-gold, as I am, who aren't necessarily anti-gold, but they're also pro-Bitcoin. Guys like Larry Lepard are brilliant minds. The author of the In Gold We Trust report, Ronnie Sturfula, even Ray Dalio says, I'll buy gold and I'll sprinkle a little Bitcoin on top. When you talk about gold or Bitcoin, it's not helpful, I think, just to mock Bitcoin unilaterally or call Bitcoin investors naive or just pure raw speculators, because a lot of the macro argument behind Bitcoin is almost identical to the macro concerns that gold investors have. That said, I think over the years, I've tried with an obvious bias towards this pet rock analog old thing called gold with a hole in the ground in the Swiss Alps, why it's still infinitely a better store of value, why it's still infinitely a safer investment, and why it's still infinitely more safe and secure and decentralized than gold in a bank or Bitcoin on a blockchain. But that doesn't mean Bitcoin doesn't have a role. What I've discovered, really not since 2009 when Bitcoin first came out, I looked at it as the ultimate speculation tulip. Guys like Eric Voorhees would say, well, tulips don't rise, fall, and then go to new all-time highs. You can't just say this is a tulip. The market cap is huge. It has these properties that are very unique. It has this technology. They would argue that Bitcoin is like email and gold is like the old post office. You just got to get modern. You got to get with it. There's a lot of strength to the argument, but with trying to be as objective and not just an apologist for gold, I really tried to understand, where did this come from? What's it really doing? Why is it really here? Who really created it? I don't say I have all the answers, but to your original question, the long answer to your very important question, it's only been in the last 12 months that I've started to try to put these dots together. It's an opinion. It's a very strong opinion. I think it's backed by some evidence. I'm not alone in this opinion. I'm not saying it's the only opinion. To me, Bitcoin, the narrative is quite ironic. I call it the Trump paradox, as you said in your opening question. how can it be that that an individual like the president of the United States, who is obviously has to favor the currency or the money, if you want to call it the currency, or the mighty dollar. How can a president, who, by the way, as you pointed out 3 years ago, openly said he thought Bitcoin was a scam, during
Right.
the election, with his biggest donors being the crypto community in general and Bitcoin in particular, how can the president of the United States, who called something a scam 3 years ago, now be talking about a Bitcoin strategic reserve or stockpile? We can get into Larry Fink and BlackRock in a second, but okay, looking just at the president of the United States talking about this when he was just threatening the BRICS recently about 100% tariff for getting away from the mighty dollar, that is
Right.
unacceptable, the mighty dollar. But the entire narrative of Bitcoin from when it first came out was anti-dollar, anti-fiat, anti-government, anti-centralization, anti-system. Now, when you have the president of the United States promoting or lauding a stockpile of what is to me a speculation asset, how do you make that shift so quickly? And that got me
Right.
thinking about these larger questions. Um, is it a genuine shift, or was Bitcoin always destined to be absorbed? I don't think it was destined to be absorbed. I think it was destined to be gamed, and we can get into that. I think Bitcoin is being gamed, and
Mhm.
it's this is the tinfoil hatted part. It's like any psyop or any intel long-term play. You typically um, start with one narrative to roll something out. You do it years in advance, and then the real truth comes out years later with an entirely different
Right.
narrative. And so
Mhm.
Bitcoin has a purpose. It doesn't mean Bitcoin can't make you money as a speculation asset. It doesn't mean Bitcoin can't get higher in price. The paradox, though, of how Bitcoin came from being anti fiat, anti government, anti dollar to being embraced by the president of that dollar, to me means there's a larger play here, not just for helping American debt. And we'll get into the details of why I think
Yeah.
that, but also to ironically strengthen the dollar when Bitcoin becomes a bubble and then a bust, almost like a Twin Tower moment when Bitcoin
Mhm.
does bust. That will make central bank digital currency easier to accept as more safer and centralized than the Bitcoin rise and
Right.
fall. That's how I see it. It doesn't mean I know
Yeah.
exactly if that's correct or when it will happen. And it also doesn't mean that there aren't good points behind Bitcoin, that there aren't ways to make money in Bitcoin. And we'll get into
Right.
all those details in more detail, those arguments in more
Yeah. Yeah.
detail.
Yeah.
But to call Bitcoin a store of value or an anti-fiat or a decentralized asset or an apolitical maverick, I think all of us, pro or con with Bitcoin, need to step back and say that doesn't really make sense now as it did maybe 5 years ago or 4 years ago. And we
Yeah.
need to try and connect those dots.
Yeah, absolutely. It may have been a certain thing when it was first conceived, and it may
Mm-hmm.
be being co-opted along the way, or maybe it was always designed to be that way. And we
Mm-hmm.
may not know. We may
Yeah.
not know the answer to that now, or not
Mm-hmm.
until a little bit of history plays out. But it's
Mm-hmm.
as you say, I think it's definitely worth asking these questions. Whether you're pro, con, doesn't matter. We need to know what's going on, and
Yeah.
that's the whole purpose of having this conversation.
Correct.
You brought up, and I think you've already kind of hinted at this very interesting historical parallel to oil. So
Mm-hmm.
Trump has already referred to Bitcoin as the new oil.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in the 1970s, we saw how oil prices were very purposely manipulated.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to ask you to sort of explain that parallel, and
Mm-hmm.
is Bitcoin being used in the same way
Mm-hmm.
to serve a particular purpose around debt?
Yeah, this was again, I want to give credit to where it's due for connecting these dots. Luke Groman, another Midwesterner, very blunt spoken. And by the way, somewhat pro Bitcoin and very pro gold. So again, this doesn't mean we're mocking Bitcoin when we're trying to put the dots together here. And it was kind of a eureka moment for Luke Groman. He was looking at what was considered a conspiracy theory until about 10 years ago. A book came out about the oil trade. And in the 70s, when we went off the gold standard, and that gave Nixon and every president thereafter an unchaperoned dollar, the ability to create as much dollars as you wanted, because you'd have to have it pegged to a certain stored amount of audited gold in Fort Knox. So we had an unfettered dollar post 1971. It was very important, though, that that dollar didn't get debased or inflated overnight, or the gold didn't rip. And so Kissinger was very deliberate right after we went off the gold standard. We created the COMEX to use futures trades. We'll get into the details of that in 1974. But at that same period, we were trying to find demand for the dollar to keep it reasonable. Of course, the first thing was to go out to the OPEC nations and say, let's make oil dollar backed. Let's create this petrodollar. There wasn't an automatic yes from Saudi Arabia et al. To do that. In the 70s, the US Treasury had a much higher yield, and the Treasury and the debt levels of the US weren't nearly what they are today. So it was easier to make that case in the 70s to create a petrodollar. But in addition to that very necessary need, if the world has to buy oil in dollars, that creates a natural demand or a forced demand for the dollar that keeps the dollar from hyperinflating, and it keeps the dollar very powerful. But that wasn't enough for Kissinger and his crowd, as you can imagine. If you know anything about Kissinger or the US has no friends or enemies, just interests, like any realpolitik. And that wasn't enough. And what was really going on is Kissinger was out there, in addition to striking a deal with the oil states, was saying, look, we're going to inflate this asset, this now dollar-backed asset, by hundreds of percentage points in a very short time. We want you on board for this. If we inflate gold by 2, 3, 400% in price, and I mean oil by 2 or 3, 400% in price, if we inflate oil quickly, and the world has to buy that oil in dollars, that helps us post-Vietnam pay down some debt. Now that may sound like a conspiracy theory or a Tom Clancy novel, but again, by 2014, this came out as an open reality. Gulf Cooperation Council members, OPEC members admitted that this happened back in the 70s. And what was the play there? Again, the play was to artificially and deliberately inflate oil, dollar backed, right, to bring money in to pay down US debt with the cooperation of OPEC et al. Okay, that's fine. That's realpolitik. That's clever. That's classic Kissinger move. What Luke Groman was saying is, boy, you think about Bitcoin. Why is the president calling this the new oil? Why is our leader, who's supposed to protect our currency and our dollar, embracing an anti-fiat blockchain technology non-dollar? Well, if you create what Luke is saying, what Francis Hunt and the Black Swan capitalists, and now I'm trying to figure out, I think is true. Well, one of the things you can do is you can inflate Bitcoin, create interest, create momentum, create media, create hype, politicize it by talking about it as an inflatable asset to pay down debt. But more importantly, if you understand, just like oil and the dollar were kind of tethered, well, Bitcoin and Tether, which is a stable coin, which is 85% US Treasury backed, are also tethered, so to speak. In other words, you can trade between Bitcoin and Tether very easily. The higher the Bitcoin price, the higher the Tether demand, the higher the Tether price. Tether is another way to purchase US Treasuries. So if you create a bubble, that's one reason. There's other reasons, but if you create a bubble in Bitcoin, you indirectly create a bubble in Tether. Tether helps take the pressure off the Fed to mouse click money to buy otherwise unloved US Treasuries, especially post-sanction. The world, mathematically, objectively, empirically, is buying less US Treasuries and stacking more gold. That puts more pressure on the Fed to create instant artificial money to buy our unloved IOUs. But if you create a Bitcoin bubble and you create a Tether interest, well, then investors are buying US Treasuries through Tether, and that's taking some of the pressure off of the Fed. Now, the market cap of Tether is not nearly as big enough to solve the US Treasury problem. The fact that the US Treasury is unloved, distrusted since we weaponized it and since we overissued it because we have so much public debt. It's just one example. But in the near term, that creates some interest. The other thing that Bitcoin can do, if you create a bubble in Bitcoin, in a strategic stockpile of Bitcoin, well, if it goes up in price at 25% per year is what they're for. That's a huge if. But they're saying if we create a bubble in Bitcoin, well, then like El Salvador, we can liquidate, we can have enough, we can create money from that. And we can use that to pay down our debt. So the irony is you can actually create a bubble in a nonsensical digital pet rock, in my opinion. You can create hype in the ultimate super politicized, centralized ETF BlackRock tulip, make it huge, and then use that lottery winning. Why not make it NVIDIA? Why not make it, Microsoft? But you take something that's supposedly maverick, make that a bubble. When it gets to a massive market cap, when it gets from, they're talking at 19 trillion someday, well, then you sell some of that off and pay down your debt. That's one way you could argue they're indirectly trying to inflate an asset to take a profit like El Salvador did to pay off debt. That makes it very political, even though it's ironically anti-dollar. Again, we can get into how I think that's a little crazy. I mean, to do that, they're projecting 25% CAGR, annualized growth so that you're starting at $200,000 Bitcoin in 2025. By 2050, that could be a $42 trillion, Bitcoin pile. Bitcoins could be 42 million per coin. We sell a few of those. We pay down some of our public debt. That's a lot of assumptions on the way. I don't think we'll ever get there, but you can see the desperation. And that's why I said Bitcoin is a desperate measure for desperate times. The Bitcoin fanatics will absolutely hate that argument because they still believe, maybe correctly and certainly in good faith, that no, we're trying to be totally outside of the system. Eric Voorhees slammed his fist and said, the only reason I like Bitcoin is I don't trust government, I don't trust banks, and I want to be free of that system. He said that about 8 months ago. I don't know what he could say now as it's becoming so politicized, so inflated, so media loved, so President Trump loved, so memed. You got to wonder, are we as desperate as El Salvador? And are we as dark also to have an even darker motive down the road to let this thing blow? And then we already have the XRP railways and we have the blockchain digital immutable ledger. And when it blows up, we'll say, well, gee, Bitcoin was dangerous. We thought it was special.
Right.
But hey, we've got a central bank version of this for the dollar. The railway system's already set up. The blockchain compliance is already set up. Let's just roll out CBDC. You'll thank us. So they win on both sides. They get to gamble with Bitcoin, artificially inflate it. The house wins. They pay down debt. Then they blow it up, and then we'll introduce frog boil and CBDC as a far safer, more dollar-focused blockchain solution.
Right.
That's way down the road, but you now see how perfectly natural that makes sense. And if I were desperate and I had technology and I had control of the media, the message, and the money, I gotta be honest, that's what I would do. And so does that make Bitcoin investors stupid? I mean, you could front run that trade if you believe that. It still makes you rich.
Sure.
But it's certainly not what it promises to be. It's not at all what it promises to be.
Absolutely. There's still a lot of money to be made. So people who are positioned are not wrong to do so if they know how they're playing the. But, if we are in this bubble, a lot of people have leveraged a lot to win. What happens to those people when they're holding the bag if this plays out? And it could play out a lot faster. Given how, look, we're in February of 2025 and so much has already happened. Things could be really accelerating. So what happens to those people who have really gone all in?
Well, that's that's the question, right? And then it's a timing question, and it's a premise question. And as I answer, I was also thinking we have to also think, in addition to these advantages of creating a bubble or frog boiling us into CBDC under a false narrative, by making Bitcoin a bubble and increasing its market cap from 2 trillion to 4 trillion to 6 trillion to 7 trillion, you're also taking a lot of attention away from the gold argument, because Bitcoin uses the exact narrative of gold. They even have a gold coin with a B on it. It's not gold by anything. It's not digital gold. It's not. But again, that will upset the Bitcoin. But they've done a brilliant job of co-opting the gold narrative as a true anti-fiat, a true independent, no counterparty risk outside of the system. But think about it. What is Kissinger afraid of? What was Volcker afraid of? What is President Trump afraid of? What is every central banker afraid of since 1971? What is the gold price? If you read the book 6 Days in August, which came out about when we decoupled from gold, Volcker, Martin, the president, everyone came in. Volcker every day. What's the gold price? What's the gold price? If gold goes too high, the jig is up. The joke is over. The magic trick's ending. When gold rips too high, that's proof that your financial system, your monetary system, and your currency has no credibility. Right. By bringing in Bitcoin, creating a Bitcoin hysteria, a Bitcoin centralization, a Bitcoin meme, there's huge market cap going to Bitcoin. There's even a gold narrative. It's even a gold look. They call it digital gold. So it is taking attention, especially among younger speculating investors, my kids included. They're tracking to that. They're following that carrot. They're taking market share away from gold. They're taking the pressure of gold off of the dollar. So that's another reason why there's a deliberate political interest in creating this mysterious thing that came out of Satoshi Nakamoto in 2009. We'll get into that too, but it starts to make sense as another way to solve the gold problem too. We can't let people figure out gold en masse all at once too fast, because then gold has natural price discovery. It rips naturally, and that makes the dollar narrative impossible. It makes U.S. Treasuries unlovable too fast. So I think Bitcoin acts as a kind of airbag. To your other question, what happens to the Bitcoin owners who put everything into Bitcoin? and some to huge advantage. We get a lot of clients who've made millions of dollars in Bitcoin, and they know what it is, a speculation asset that they want to convert to gold quickly. But
Right.
not everyone. Some truly believe it is the revolutionary, rebel, maverick, anti-system solution. And I believe they're sincere. The irony is that's ironic because that's not really, I think, what the real play is, unbeknownst to them. But to
Yeah.
your point, if you're all in on Bitcoin, you are certainly, no matter what you can say, even if you've made millions or tens of millions, you've had a stomach churning ride. And I've often said, I admire anyone who bought Bitcoin at 1,000. I wish I had. I would not have had the courage to hold it past 2,000 or 3,000. So anyone who stayed in has conviction and guts more than I've had.
Yeah.
Most people have not enjoyed that straight ride. And even if they've stayed in it, they've been shooken up and beaten up emotionally, financially, and mentally so many times. And so those who've stayed in it and are all in it and put most of their net worth into it, already they've suffered massive standard deviation, massive price volatility. If they did that, they've
Yeah.
had 80% drawdowns. They have a standard deviation in triple digits. To me, as a fund manager in my past life, I would never allocate to something with that type of maximum drawdown or standard deviation unless I had 100% conviction. But to your question, those who have already not gotten many gray hairs, and many ulcers and who stayed in, there are days they feel sublime and there are
Mm-hmm.
days they feel ridiculous. Like Napoleon said, marching out of Moscow, it's the sublime or the ridiculous. I have a lot of respect for those who've enjoyed it, stuck with it, made the money. How long can this casino, this gamed system, this rigged Bitcoin narrative last? 5 minutes, 5 weeks, 5 years? Who am I
Yeah.
to say? I do not know. It's like being a
Yeah.
turkey on Thanksgiving. I don't know when the farmer is coming with the axe or the oats. I don't know. But if I
Yeah.
know I'm basically meant
Yeah.
to be dinner, I just don't want to be the turkey. And by the way, if I'm
Yeah.
wrong, if Bitcoin truly is invented by some strange guy in the Far East and it's truly radical and the whole world's going to go digital and go to Bitcoin, I'm wrong. I don't think so. And we can get into why. But I think it's a very Intel created beast that serves a lot of
Mm-hmm.
purposes, makes a lot of insiders, early adapters very wealthy. And I think in the long run, it'll crash and burn. And even if it doesn't, its volatility makes it almost impossible to believe in month to month, to build a family, a
Yeah.
career, or savings around. But it doesn't mean you can't get really wealthy. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be proud
Sure.
if you've stuck the course. But to answer your question, when, I don't know, and
Yeah.
I can't say it could last a lot longer. And it wouldn't surprise me if it blew up in 6 months. I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if it doubles its market cap. And Egon involves, and I've said it can go to zero or a million. Doesn't change the fact that it's not a store of value. Doesn't change the fact that
Yeah.
it's not programmable, trackable, and seizable. It doesn't change the fact that its entire narrative is not what it says. And for us, like we were joking before this call, that analog pet rock that Bitcoiners say, us old traditionalists don't understand, the new normal, the new digital, the new future. We actually do, but that non-programmable pet rock held outside of the banking system in your name, yeah, it's not as, you can't do a 5-second transaction across the country to buy things with, but
Right.
it's still far more outside of that centralized system than this quote unquote maverick, anti-system, anti-fiat, decentralized Bitcoin. And that's the height of all ironies to me. And so gold
Yeah.
actually outside of the central system, outside of a commercial bank, held in your own name in a jurisdiction that you trust, actually is the most free asset you can own. But it doesn't have the massive price movements up or down that Bitcoin has. And people ask me, is Bitcoin a better investment than gold? I say, absolutely it is. Look at its annualized return. It's off the charts. It's better than any investment anywhere in the world. But look at its maximum drawdowns, look at its standard deviation, and look at what and who really created it and why. And
Yeah.
make the money while you can. I made a lot of money on an
Exactly.
IPO during the .com. I knew it was a joke. Didn't help, didn't bother me. Still made me wealthy. So I'm okay with it.
Exactly.
I understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think your casino analogy is great because it's like someone who's winning at the blackjack table, but knows when they need to stand up and walk away and cash in their chips versus, oh, I'm
Yeah.
still winning. I can hold on a
Yeah.
little longer. And then, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a big risk.
Mhm.
I wanted to, you mentioned El Salvador a few times, and I wanted to ask you to just unpack that a little bit and help people understand what actually happened in El Salvador. So, very famously, a few years ago, they made it legal tender. And I wanted to ask you to explain how they used that to meet debt obligations and surge the value of their bonds. And then, talk about how recently they've just abandoned it as legal
Yeah.
tender thanks to the IMF.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. I mean, I think it was in 2021, they made Bitcoin legal tender, and that was big headlines that showed a sovereign adoption of this maverick anti-dollar, anti-fiat fixed supply, immutable asset. Great tailwind for the Bitcoin narrative, right? Certainly, when the price appreciation of Bitcoin, despite its volatility, was the winning chip at the casino, it was the winning stock at the dot-com bubble, it was the winning trade in tech. If you were long that, whether it was an anti-fiat decentralized blockchain currency, or whether it was Nvidia or Lucent or Commerce One or Microsoft in the late 90s, your inbox, your savings account, your checking account as a nation exploded. You invested in something, right? Because it wasn't used as a medium of exchange or a store of value. Less than 1% of the citizens of El Salvador actually bought anything with Bitcoins. Let's not call it a currency, folks. It wasn't the new currency of El Salvador. And again, that's not anti-Bitcoin, that's just a fact. It was a speculation asset. It was the ultimate speculation asset for an otherwise financially stressed country. They had the courage to take that risk. If Bitcoin had gone to $5 instead of 70,000, they would have been the dust. You would have to blow the dust off of El Salvador. It would have been a disaster. Luckily, fortunately, it went very well. So they were able to do a lot of things politically in El Salvador, but they had the winning piggy bank, the winning speculation investment, not the most stable currency because it was never a medium of exchange in El Salvador. Again, less than 1% actually bought anything with Bitcoin. It was the Lucent trade of the 90s. It was, Cisco. It was Nvidia of recent. It was a huge asset appreciation that they then liquidated to get liquidity. And now they've qualified, ironically, for a loan from the IMF, which is the height of ironies. Because anyone who's read John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, you know that the IMF or World Bank, when it gives a loan to a third world developing economy, it's a user's loan with lots of strings attached. But the irony is El Salvador basically made a deal for a $1.4 billion loan from the IMF, which is the worst partner you could ever have, in my opinion, but that's a whole other story. But to do that, they agreed to take Bitcoin, to constrain Bitcoin's use in the public sector. So it's still a private little coin, or I wouldn't even call it, it's a private poker chip for speculation, but it's not really part of the public narrative of El Salvador. So long and short, Bitcoin won the lottery ticket on a good speculation asset, took those winnings to pay down some of its own debt, improve its economy, and qualify for a loan from the IMF, which is the height of all ironies. They went full circle right back into the lion's den with the IMF, but they're going to get a big loan. But again, not to criticize Bitcoin investors, but please don't call Bitcoin El Salvador's national currency. Don't call it a medium of exchange, and don't call it a store of value. Call it what it is. There's no embarrassment or shame in calling Bitcoin what it is, the speculation asset of a lifetime, which brings all the euphoria and all the pain of any speculation asset of a lifetime. The question is picking your on-ramps and off-ramps. That is an art and a science. There are techies who can do it, traders who can do it. I've never known anyone who can do it very well. Most people are just lucky. I got into a pre-IPO in the 90s. It was a Bitcoin type of trade. It was a lottery ticket. I knew it was a lottery ticket. I never claimed that it was book value, PE, fundamentals. It was the momentum trade of the time. If you had the contacts, luck to get into a pre-IPO, you can pick 7. One was a home run. Fine. Don't call that anything other than is a lottery ticket, speculation asset. And I got out by luck, not by genius. And I think confusing Bitcoin with the future of money or the new currency, that is the carrot, that is the meme, that is the propaganda, and we'll get into why. But that is also the trap, in my humble opinion. That doesn't mean Larry Lepard or Ronnie Sturfula or Eric Voorhees or Jack Mallers are stupid or they're liars. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean anyone who invests in Bitcoin is stupid. I'm just saying, let's call it what it is. Let's call a duck a duck. Let's look at the risks and let's look at the politicization behind it. And then you can make your own moral. There was nothing moral or immoral about me doing an IPO. There's nothing moral or immoral about making or losing money. But there's something dishonest about calling it the new future of money, the new currency, or the new freedom. It's not. It's being controlled by the very forces you think you were trying to get away from. That I do believe.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of a brilliant play on the part of El Salvador. And I wanted to ask, do you think that's a one-off? Do you think other countries could follow that template? Or is that
Mhm.
actually the template that you think might be used, minus the IMF loan, for the United States? Or now that it's been done and we see how
Mhm.
things went in El Salvador, they won't do it the same way again?
Well, think about it. Trump is many things. He's not stupid. Why do you think
Hmm.
Loomis has this new bill? Why does she want to potentially sell gold certificates to buy more Bitcoin? If you have a vested interest in making a bubble or making Bitcoin one of your solutions, you could replicate El Salvador writ large. And if you're at the US and you have the power of the US media, the US Senate, the US president, the US narrative, and your US is promoting this bubble, that's more power than El Salvador had. So you could argue they could replicate it at a much higher multiple with much more momentum. As you know, I would say momentum is everything in a lot of ways. Sentiment, you can create the sentiment. You can absolutely balloon the demand for Bitcoin and do an El Salvador, but do it not with El Salvador's budget and power, but do it with the US's budget and power, and also solve the US's part of its debt, because US debt is racing past 40 trillion pretty soon, just public. Now I'm not even talking about unfunded liabilities and all the others that we don't even talk about. But if you could triple or quadruple Bitcoin's market cap and be part of that casino chip and then use that to pay down debt, you have every incentive to do that, despite how it's not even a friend of your own currency. The question is whether you pick Bitcoin or Nvidia or eToys or WeWork. It's only as good as that stock price is good or that momentum is good. So if you are artificially create a bubble and you are the president of the United States and you do have Loomis Bill and you do have all the tech support and you've got all the techies as your cabinet members or advisors or secret handlers, of course, front run that trade if you think that's what they're trying to do. And then it's hard not to see the logic in that, but that assumes complete control. That assumes that the world doesn't catch on. That assumes that
Right.
Bitcoin does grow 25% compounded annually till 2049. I'm not here to say that it can't. I highly doubt that it will. I think more
Hmm.
people are catching on to how desperate this measure is. Again, that is why Trump said it
Right.
was a scam 3 years ago. But if it's a
Yeah.
scam that works to your advantage, well, I'm agnostic now. And look, I knew the IPO that I bought in 1998 had absolutely no value. It never
Right.
earned a dime. Its stock price went from pennies to 300 plus a share in a matter of a year. I had no ideal faith that that was a real company. Is that immoral? No, I don't care. I'm sorry, I'm 28 years old. I'm making stupid money. I'm an idiot. I don't deserve it. But am I going to hate that stock? No, I'm going to enjoy it. But even worse, if
Hmm.
I can manipulate that stock, or I can control the story behind that stock, or I can control the narrative, that's even more reason to
Right.
feel safe in that stock. And that's where it gets darker than just being a lucky idiot like I was,
Yeah.
and thousands of other 20 somethings in the late 90s who got money
Right.
on tech bubbles. This is far more nefarious if
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
claiming to do something independent when you're actually lying through your teeth, calling it independent, and you're using it. You're creating an artificial bubble in an asset to pay down your debt through the power of the White House, through the power of our Senate and House to pass a bill to sell gold certificates so that taxpayers can buy Bitcoin so you can pay down public debt and put the risk on them. That is dark. And if I'm right,
Yeah.
if Francis Hunt is right, if the Black Swan capitalists are right, if Luke Gromen, who's pro Bitcoin, is right, doesn't make him immoral, but it makes the Bitcoin narrative highly, highly suspicious. And
Right.
again, you have to ask these questions. It doesn't mean I'm the only answer, but I don't think we're far off here. I don't.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it starts to get even darker. So I think we should start to talk about some of those other
Mhm.
areas. Like,
Mhm.
um, you've warned that Bitcoin could be a Trojan horse for digital financial control in the
Mhm.
introduction of CBDCs. We already
Right.
have
Right.
surveillance tools with blockchain. So could
Mhm.
Bitcoin transactions become trackable
Mhm.
and sanctionable and pave the way for CBDCs?
Yes and yes and no and no. First of all, Tether definitely can. Tether, which is paired with Bitcoin, which is again, you inflate Bitcoin to get increased interest in Tether. Tether is a central bank digital currency. It's just not issued by a two-tier banking system. It's not issued by a central bank, but it has all the characteristics of a central bank digital currency. It's not issued by the Fed. So it's an entry drug to what will eventually be a Fed-based central bank digital currency. I think that's just inevitable. Bitcoin too has, and I've talked to a lot of very wealthy Bitcoin clients who've become gold buyers too. They're not anti-gold, they're not even anti-Bitcoin, but they've studied Bitcoin far more than me, and they've educated me a lot in the last 2 years on Bitcoin. The idea that Bitcoin is truly anonymous and that Bitcoin is truly private is absolutely untrue. It's extremely transparent. And the true Bitcoin supermen and women that I know, they know how transparent it is. Like in
Hmm.
2016, there was a bunch of tax issues. The IRS worked with various exchanges to get very clear clarity on who owned what. Doesn't mean perfect. And there are tricks you can do with different wallets and addresses if you're really into this. Usually that's because you really have something to hide. So that's a question. But to think you have total privacy or total freedom outside of the system or government because you have Bitcoin, that's absolutely an illusion. That's another meme that's been spread that you're outside. So that's
Hmm.
not true. And I don't want to get into all the weeds, but there's plenty of examples of exchanges where you have to get your 1099K, you have to fill out the forms. They know who you are. You're still going to pay taxes on your gains. You're still going to have trackability. Tether is even more programmable, more trackable, and more in the spirit of Trudeau in Canada, more seizable. You just,
Hmm.
that doesn't come out. When they talk about stable coins or even cryptos, they talk about how it's so much more efficient, so much more transparent, so much
Yeah.
safer, and that your money will be backed not by some random brokerage house or some too big to fail bank, but by the government of America or the government of Canada. That all sounds wonderful. Powell has talked about it. The IMF has talked about it. Um, Certainly Trudeau has talked about it. What they're leaving out is if I don't like what you wrote, what you said, or who you're hanging out with, or who you're meeting with, or what your plans are, that's just as seizable as as central bank digital currency, that stable
Hmm.
coin. And eventually with
Hmm.
Bitcoin, it isn't as transparent. Is it as seizable? My theory, and again, I could be wrong. My theory is that when Bitcoin goes from the sublime to the ridiculous, and I don't know when, probably after we benefited from it, till we gotten some of our benefit from it. But when it does have some exogenous event, and the world is terrified of crypto and meme coins, you're going to get a politician at the IMF or the World Bank or in the US who's going to say, oh, thank God the central bankers have a solution. We've got this better version. It's going to be,
Yeah.
that will never happen to you with our central bank digital
Yeah.
currency. What happened to you with Bitcoin, despite all the partying and all the fun and the Ferraris and the South Beach vacations, we're going to give you stability now. And so the
Right.
world, as Ferguson said, when you stand out in the rain long enough, you'll get in anyone's car. If you've just been beaten up by an altcoin or crypto or Bitcoin, and they come up with central bank digital currency in the nick of time, and it's so much safer, you're not going to think about programmability or seizability or surveyability. You're going to think about
Yeah.
safety. And you're going to be so
Yeah.
beaten down, you're going to agree to it. And that's how I would do it if I were a dark operative. I'd beat you down and then give you a solution. And to beat you down, I have to build you up first. It's very twisted. And again,
Hmm.
it doesn't happen in 1 week, 1 month, 1 quarter. It takes time. And so
Yeah.
that's how they will frog boil us into central bank digital currency. I've said years ago, and I wrote about it years ago, it's inevitable. The train is not going to stop. And
Right.
what Bitcoin is, and when we get into XRP and the compatibility and the digital highway and the tracks that are being laid for central bank digital currency, it's just warming us up. It's getting us ready for something else, which is far more nefarious. In the meantime,
Yeah.
it's making some of us
Yeah.
very wealthy.
Yeah. It's the way you laid it out is very clear. I can just see them saying CBDCs are safe and effective. I mean, just, but a lot of people were cheering just a few weeks ago that there was an executive order that said the US federal government will not pursue CBDCs. So a lot of people think, oh, that's great. Trump, he's fighting for our freedom. But we were just talking to Mark Jeftovic, the Bitcoin capitalist, and he made a very good point that doesn't preclude states from pursuing CBDCs or linking Bitcoin and other digital assets. So, and then we just recently saw an article that suggested that 1/3 of US states already have legislation in the works to allocate Bitcoin
Yeah.
reserves. So, do
Yeah.
you think that it may not come at the federal level, but it may start rolling out more at the state level?
Yes and yes. I mean, first of all, when Trump, and again, I'm not trying to be anti-Trump. I don't even know if Trump is capable of fully understanding what's happening beneath, below, behind, or above him. He may or may not. There is a reason Trump did think it was a scam 3 years ago. And I think he doesn't believe it's a scam now. With all trying to give the best benefit of the doubt to Trump. He may not, because he's a businessman, not a crypto tech genius, and he's certainly not a politician in the normal sense. He might actually believe with this executive order that we are never going CBDC, and he may mean it. What he may not understand is that Tether or stablecoin is just CBDC. It's just not issued by the Fed. It has all the other characteristics of it. So it's kind of like heads I win, tails you lose. I'm not really lying. I'm tricking you. Am I tricking you deliberately? You know, when you tell your wife she looks good in that dress, does she? You tell her what she wants to hear. Maybe you even believe it yourself to avoid a fight. I don't know if Trump really realizes. I think he meant it when he said, I'm not under my watch are we issuing CBDC from the Fed and tracking you and seizing you like that Joker Canada did during the trucker protests. We're America. We're never going to do that. And he's telling the truth. But by allowing stablecoin to become normalized, that is still just a version of it under a different name. It is a wolf in sheep's clothing, in a sense. It's a libertarian libertarian facade of this stable coin. It's not centralized, it's not government, but come on, it is just as trackable, programmable, and seizable if you and I do something that they don't like. And it'll eventually, I think, again, pave the way for a more direct CBDC, which may be long after Trump is gone. So he won't have to lie or get caught saying, read my lips, no more taxes, or the war in Iraq is over on an aircraft carrier and look like a hypocrite. He may mean it. But what he may or may not know is he was pulling the height of all ironies by getting rid of CBDC at the same time he's supporting Bitcoin and a Tether pair trade, because it's the exact same thing. Whether I shoot you with a shotgun or a 9mm, you're still got a bullet in your chest. I can just say, well, it's a shotgun blast, but it's still a blast. And it's still CBDC. It's just another name. And so that's what I want people to understand. Doesn't mean they have to hate Bitcoin. Doesn't mean they have to buy gold. Just know what's really happening. Be aware and put these dots together for yourself. To your question about states, and again, I'm not going to give away any client secrecy or thing, but it's true. We have many states call us in Switzerland suggesting that they create their own reserve of gold. If the Federal Reserve won't do it, if their country won't do it, just like citizens, if your central bank isn't going to support your currency and insure your currency with a real asset, then you have to do it yourself. You, me, and thousands of others do that every day, some to hundreds of millions of dollars in gold to ensure their dying fiat money. It makes perfect sense. Some states will do that too. They can buy gold or they can buy Bitcoin. El Salvador can go long Bitcoin, or it can try and create a gold standard. It's up to each of us to figure that out. In terms of instant gratification, Bitcoin makes more sense. More incentive to politicize Bitcoin, to artificially inflate it. If the state of Texas, hypothetically, I'm not saying it is Texas, the state of Utah, Michigan, Ohio, if they want to create a Bitcoin strategic reserve and pay off some of their municipal bonds or pay off some of their debt or help their infrastructure or build better roads on a bubble asset, well, again, that can be sublime or it can be ridiculous. That's up to each state to determine. What I want voters, citizens, and investors to understand is be aware of the highs and the lows and the risk. If you think Bitcoin is the miracle solution, be careful. If it is a miracle solution, it's only because the government wants to make it so. And you would say, so what, Matt? Don't fight the Fed. Don't fight the government. If they want to inflate Bitcoin, I'm going to ride that. I'm going to front run that. My state, my checking account, and my investment. I'm going to do it. But that assumes that the state or the Fed or the government or the White House has total control every year, every day, every month. There may be other things that put a needle in that fantasy. And I don't know, we can go over what they could be. States could do that, to your point, and your viewer and your guest. States absolutely could adopt Bitcoin as a strategic stockpile or reserve. They have to sell that to their voters. And they'll look just like El Salvador did, brilliant, if things go right. But if Bitcoin has a mean reversion back to below 12,000 or 10,000, they bought it at 200,000, then that state is ruined. And are you willing to take that type of risk? I wouldn't put 100% risk in any asset, including gold, which I believe in. I've always said the biggest risk on the markets is concentration, leverage, and timing. Anyone who thinks they can control all three of those is a fool. That doesn't mean I don't believe in gold infinitely more than any other asset class as a wealth preservation asset. I've looked at them all. I've tried to be as objective as I can. I am overly biased in favor of gold, and I've tried to be a devil's advocate as much as I can. Yes, I'm selling my book, but I believe it. If my opinions change, you'll be the first to know. Believe me, I will say it. If I lose faith in gold, I'll say it. And I don't lose faith in Bitcoin as a speculation asset, but I cannot with a straight face say that the risk of an absolute meltdown in Bitcoin isn't very real. Gold will never disappear. It will never go to zero. It will never lose 80% in one fiscal quarter or make those kind of price moves. And that's why it's a better store of value. Is it a better return on investment in a given year? Absolutely not. But the
Right.
risk of a state or a government artificially inflating this asset and saying they can control it legally, that's simply not true. And you cannot guarantee
Yeah.
25% CAGR on this compounded annual return. That's impossible unless you're
Yeah.
rigging it and unless you're lying. And then fine, you could say, Matt, well, I don't care about that either. I'm going to front run it. I don't think it's that simple. I don't think Bitcoin is that much of a sure thing. And again, I could be wrong. But no matter what,
Right.
if it was, if you see Bitcoin annualizing at 25% because the government or the state of Texas or Michigan or Ohio have a vested interest in creating a bubble, you could say, well, it's cheating. The house is winning. That isn't American. That isn't free markets. That isn't capitalism. That is a centralized asset creation of a centralized state, preparing you for a centralized breakdown so they can internalize central bank digital currency so they can control you more. And you know,
Mm.
this goes back to my thesis I've said from the day one. Every debt-strapped nation, regime, monarchy, democracy goes through a syllogism where you go from a debt crisis to centralization. Every time, without exception, throughout history. And the irony is, in my opinion, we're seeing that right now through the name of an inflated asset that's supposed to be decentralized, apolitical, and
Right.
maverick. And that is the height of all ironies. And that is classic, to me, Spook 101 PSYOP, to me. And that
Yeah.
may tinfoil hatted crazy. Totally get it. Totally get it. I get it. But I don't think me, Luke Groman, Francis Hunt, and others are trying to be crazy. We're trying to make sense of this. And
Hmm.
we're trying
Hmm.
to connect dots. And we're not trying to mock anyone who's made millions of dollars on Bitcoin. I made millions of dollars on a
Sure.
stupid IPO that had no value. I don't feel
Sure.
guilty. I never called that smart investing or
Right.
wise balance sheet or good for our country or good free price discovery, or even
Yeah.
natural capitalism. It was a mania. And this is a
Right.
mania that's becoming centralized. And that has much
Yeah.
scarier ramifications than a dot-com bubble.
Yeah, it's different when you start wearing it as, you invested that IPO, you knew exactly what you were doing. It was a game and you were playing the game and you knew what the
Mhm.
rules were. But when you start changing the rules as you're playing the game or pretending that you're playing a different game, that's a very different thing. And so, you've
Mhm.
already talked a little bit about the
Mhm.
links
Mhm.
to intelligence that
Mhm.
may
Mhm.
be inherent in this
Yep.
entire mania. You've
Mhm.
also mentioned, and I wanted to get a little bit deeper into XRP. And
Yep.
and
Yep.
so in your article, you highlighted how
Mhm.
the infrastructure for XRP predates the origin
Yeah.
of Bitcoin. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
think that that timeline might suggest that there was some intelligence links in
Mhm.
creating Bitcoin. So just elaborate on that. Explain why that raised red flags for
Yeah.
you.
And again, caveat, where there's smoke, there's fire. I'm drawing my own conclusions. I'm connecting my own dots. I'm not saying I have the inside track from somebody who's directing the CIA or I've broken in and hacked the system and I know. It just makes sense to me. And again, I'm not alone in this. And it is a dark thesis. It is a
Hmm.
scary thought. It's one we have to at least play out and consider. And the more I play it out and the more I consider it, the more it makes sense. There's a couple of things. And again, I want to give credit. And if people really want to dig deeper into this, there's people who know a lot more about it. There's a great platform called the Black Swan Capitalists. They've done some real work on this. And there are others you can talk to or look at. But it makes sense to me. When you think about the distributed ledger technology, uh, in all things digital and tokenizable, and that's the new trend now. This is the new digital future, which you talk only about the positive things, and you've got to think about what is this, immutable, digital distributed ledger technology, and what is XRP and Ripple, and how does that have to do with Bitcoin and the dark state and the rollout and the timing? Well, if you think of the world going digital and tokenable, there's a whole highway system, there's a whole rail system. It's really the old system as it was, whether it's for contracts or interbank payments or smart contracts or cross-border transactions. It's still the same system, but now it's digital. So it's
Hmm.
taking the old system and modernizing it. That's the carrot, that's the pipe, that's the beauty. It's this new XRP digital highway blockchain compatible. They have this thing called the ISO 222 compliant blockchain protocol, which means if you want to enter that highway of all things digital, you have to have this certain ISO compliance, this digital
Yeah.
toll booth to get on to all things digital. And so as we go towards more efficiency with this ISO compliance to get on this better payment system, including Bitcoin has to be ISO compliant. Everything has to be on this highway. Well, that highway and that compliance and that protocol was invented by a company that's called, it's an XRP kind of technology, which was invented by a company called Ripple, which has a number of former Intel code writers behind it. And Ripple and XRP built this highway long before Bitcoin came into play. So again, if under my premise, which is a premise and a theory, I'm not saying it's the God's honest truth, but it's what I believe. If I were going to roll out this slow frog boil towards further centralization and give it a name of efficiency and modernism and all things digital and good, I would create a very controllable infrastructure with a very tight, complex, hard to understand technology. I would give it all kinds of euphemisms and compatibilities, and I would make it look wonderful and modern. And I would say, hey, even Bitcoin, the mavericks, if they want to get on that digital highway, they have to have this compliance protocol. But if before I was going to roll out Bitcoin as a nefarious asset in sheep's, as a wolf in sheep's clothing, I would create the infrastructure first. The same guys that created XRP, I would probably hire to help me create Bitcoin. I wouldn't say it out loud. This is my thesis, my belief. I'm not saying it's right. But you got guys like Glenn Lilly, who created the Deep Hash algo in 2001, who then went to work for Bitcoin, but he was also at the NSA. And you've got guys like Jeffrey Mann, who was at the NSA. Again, this is the Intel industrial complex of DC, which is another centralized example of distortion of all things that I believed in about America once upon a time. You've got guys like Jeff Mann. So we created Bitcoin so you could track what our enemies are doing with their money. And you had presidents, and you have Jamie Dimon and Trump 3 years ago saying it's just for, it's for nefarious things like money laundering, weapons, or child trafficking. Now it's a stockpile for American debt solving. How do you explain this? But again, in terms of the timing of creating this XRP digital highway infrastructure, before Bitcoin's even discovered by Satoshi magically in 2009, you've already got the infrastructure in place. Bitcoin or any other XRP compliant protocol, blockchain compliant protocol, whether it's for intrabank transfers, whether it's for cross-border transactions faster than SWIFT, whether it's for smart contracts or new altcoins, anything that wants to be digital or tokenable, which has a lot of crap behind it, but anything good, bad, and ugly in the tokenized space, the digital space, has to have this, they call it compatibility, this protocol. So you own the system, you own it. And that entry, that toll booth is very dangerous. And if and when Bitcoin is destroyed or blows up, but you had to have it get there first. And to get there first, you had to create the highway first. And the highway was created by NSA alumni who then went to work for Bitcoin. Again, smoke and fire, not saying I know for sure, but to me, it makes perfect sense. And you could say that is tinfoil hatted. Absolutely. But to me, it makes sense that Ripple and Jeffrey Mann and guys like Glenn Lilly and Ripple and XRP came out before Bitcoin was even on our radar. And that doesn't mean anyone who bought Bitcoin was part of a conspiracy theory or part of a grand master plan. You can have a hedge fund that's doing insider trading. You can have 90 traders who all took the Series 7 who are doing everything legal, but one PM is doing something illegal. The others don't have a clue. Yeah. And all the people in good faith doing XRP or coding for Bitcoin, or whoever, they can be in very good faith, and any investor can be in good faith. But to me, creating that XRP system, creating that kind of Ripple Tether infrastructure for all things digital and tokenable, and then putting Bitcoin on it so you can control it for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, makes perfect sense. And the fact that you have former spooks who are doing tech things that nobody without an MIT degree can even understand, with their footprints on all those things, that to me is more distrustful. It makes me raise an eyebrow as to how this Bitcoin story went from just, come on, this is crazy, to now politicized and now a Trump favorite. And again, I think there is reasons to be concerned that XRP and Ripple came out, that the deep hash technology came out long before Bitcoin did, and that it all makes sense now. And that if you want to do anything digital or tokenizable, you have to have what they call, what's it called? There's a special word for it. Interoperability. That's the word. Interoperability through this XRP magic coin that gets you onto the highway, the toll booth. If I were a dark state Tom Clancy thinking crazy man, this is how I would do it. And if you do it slowly with enough hype and enough Matt Damon commercials and Super Bowl ads and get people rich, and It works. And if you control the information and you control the money, you control the narrative, you control the story, you control the bubble and the collapse.
Yeah.
And how long the bubble lasts and how many more millionaires will be made from it, I don't know. Could be more. Could be me. Could be
Yeah.
you if I decide to go long Bitcoin. I just don't want to. I don't want to roll the dice on a rigged casino where I don't have control of the house. And
100%. Yeah.
that's just how I look at it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it definitely won't be me.
Yeah.
Theoretically, just playing out
Mhm.
this idea, do you think that the fact that Bitcoin's creator is this anonymous Satoshi Nakamoto that no one's ever met before
Yeah.
is purposely cover for the origin myth that we've been sold on?
Yeah, I mean, think about that again. I've had this conversation with really, there's a great quote by Nassim Taleb, who
Mhm.
wrote The Black Swan. He says, the opposite of success isn't failure, it's name dropping, right? If you're name dropping, it's like the ultimate blowhard thing. I won't name names, but I will say I've talked to some pretty household name people in the Bitcoin space, some you would know, who are really into Bitcoin and who really, honestly, as we say, entre nous or unter vier Augen, have no illusions about what Bitcoin really is. And no matter how pro Bitcoin they are, and no matter how many podcasts they're on or how many billions they've made, some of them in Bitcoin, when I say, yeah, but come on, who is this Satoshi Nakamoto really? They cannot keep a straight face. That doesn't mean they know it's somebody in
Right.
Langley or in Tel Aviv or God knows where. They're not saying but they know it's not just some genius from MIT or Stanford or Harvard or Brown or wherever who kind of came up with this for the good of the people. Because if you really dig deeper, why create anyone who would create this if it was truly just a maverick individual genius, some John Nash at Princeton who created this? They would know if they're that smart to create this by themselves for the good of the people. They would know that any kind of scale would kill it because if it was
Mhm.
truly created by a maverick individual revolutionary who wanted to be outside of the system, as Jamie Dimon would say, that system would crush it immediately. The US
Exactly.
Fed, the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, the People's Bank of China, which they did, any central bank would say, this Nakamoto guy, he's bad for business. He's bad for our national sovereign currency. He's going down. This is going down. But if it was created by an intel organization to play out a long term currency manipulation and frog boil and decentralization, well, then I would keep it around. I wouldn't regulate it out of existence. I wouldn't crush it. And if
Mhm.
I would keep it and I would let it gain scale, even though it's a direct threat on paper to my national currency, my sovereign constitution protected dollar, which we've ruined in 1913 when we created the Fed. That's another story. But if it was truly created by an individual, it wouldn't have gone to scale. But if it was created with a natural or the national centralized, I want to say intel purpose, because intel isn't intelligence, it's manipulation. And you have to understand, you have to ask not just who is Satoshi Nakamoto, up until Larry Fink, another crazy story who hated Bitcoin 3 years ago, made a $50 billion spot price ETF on an asset he thought was a joke 3 years ago. Up until 2024, when Bitcoin became a BlackRock ETF, 1% of the addresses had 90% of the Bitcoin supply. It was whales. And 70% of the Bitcoin addresses were eerily static. That means they never jumped, they never got nervous, they never worried about an 80% drawdown or a 100% uptick.
Yeah.
Who in the real world, I don't care. I've met a lot of smart traders. No one has that kind of steel stomach unless it was
Mhm.
already pre programmed to do that, to not move, to just wait, because there's a long term, I would say, intel play here. Because if it was
Yeah.
naturally created by a guy named Satoshi, he wouldn't have had the stomach for that kind of gyration. But if it was created by something darker with a darker purpose to take care of our debt, to create a bubble, and then to pop that bubble when necessary or when needed, that would make sense. They would be eerily static for years since 2009. That you would
Yeah.
create these whales, these insiders, and then you wouldn't touch it. And then you would bring in more suckers and make them early adopters and rich. And then you would spread that through Matt Damon and Super Bowl ads and make it memeable and cool. That's what I would do. And so, am I right? I don't know, but that's what I would do. And you have to look at
Yeah.
the fact that so much of a large percentage of this hasn't moved. That's what an insider would do. And even my silly, innocent example of the IPO that I got in 1998, that was through guys at Goldman Sachs legally that I knew they were issuing IPOs. I joked with my partner at the time, Our due diligence was lunch at Goldman Sachs. We didn't
Yeah.
look at anything. We just had some insider help. And that was legal and innocent, and we got lucky. It's the same thing with Bitcoin. It's an insider play, but unlike my IPO in the 90s, that wasn't part of a dark state potential centralization theme to get my country out of debt. That was just classic Wall Street rigged to fail nonsense, which I'm a big boy enough to admit was, yeah, it helps to have friends in high places. Let's not kid ourselves. The markets are rigged. I wrote a book called Rigged to Fail because that's how it works. Doesn't mean guppies can't become whales, but it's very hard, very, very hard.
Right.
It is an
Right.
insider's game. And once you've been there, you know how it works. And I'm being honest. It's a confessions of a Wall Street hitman. But I'm saying for this Bitcoin play, it doesn't mean I'm anti-Bitcoin and what it can do for investors. Doesn't mean I think anyone who did it is an idiot. They're going to make a
Yeah.
lot more money in a lot of cases than they will on gold, but the risks longer term are much higher. The centralization to me is obvious. The motives are pretty clear. The dots are connected for me. And it's not just so I can get you to quit Bitcoin and come buy gold. That is not my motive. But again, people will say he's just selling his gold book. But like Larry Lepard or Ronnie Sturfula, I can like gold and Bitcoin. I could just tell you what I think of Bitcoin. Mark Friedrich, a great German friend of mine, big into Bitcoin. He's a very smart guy. And again, I'm not name dropping. Ronnie Sturfula, Incrementum, brilliant, very much knowledgeable about gold, very pro gold. Larry Lepard, very pro gold. But they also are in Bitcoin. So I'm not here to say if you're in
Right.
Bitcoin, you're a fool. I'm just saying just know what you're into. Know what's really going
Right.
on. Don't be embarrassed to at least ask these questions. That's all I can do. Ask these
Yeah.
questions. I'm not
Yeah.
accepting you or expecting anyone else to believe my conclusions. I'm working them out as I'm talking to you. But you have to
Mhm.
ask these questions, as I hope to think it still matters, as a freedom loving American, Canadian, Brit, Frenchman. If you really do believe in liberté, égalité, fraternité, or don't tread on me, if you really are a
Right.
free person, if you really did believe in the Constitution and you really did believe in the war your grandparents fought, you got to ask, is there a risk that Bitcoin is part of a centralization that no matter how much money I make isn't worth it? I don't want to be a part of that. I want to call a duck a duck. I want to pull the rug out from this. I want to hear more about this. I think we
Yeah.
owe that as good people because at a certain point, no matter how many nice cars, nice houses, polo ponies, whatever it is you have with your money, if you can't live with yourself, if you don't trust your government, if you don't trust the narrative, even what's happening with US aid, USAID, if you think Musk is just doing this for the good of the people, you need to look a little deeper in there. Again, don't take my word for it. Do your own homework. Just
Yeah.
be critical thinking. Ask these kind of questions, which is why podcasts like yours are making all the difference, one person at a time.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
Mm,
I absolutely agree. It's worth asking the questions. We may ask all those questions, get all the information, or at least as much as we have access to, and
mm.
then say, no, actually, we were
Yeah,
wrong. But
yeah,
it's a theory. But better to ask the questions than to bury
yeah,
heads in the sand.
right.
One other quick question that came
Hmm.
that came to mind. XRP, just jumping back to XRP for a second,
Hmm.
because it does
Hmm.
relate. XRP was under investigation by the SEC for many years. Is
Hmm.
that also part of the myth building of sort of establishing XRP as well? We did all
Hmm.
our due diligence. We did
Right,
a long,
right.
years long investigation. Do you think that's part of the plan?
Yeah, look, and there's again, we could spend hours on this, and there are people who know more. Again, I would recommend the Black Swan Capitalists and even Charlotte Webb and some others. But I mean, like XRP, FTX, there was a lot of nefarious characters in and out of Intel, in and out of bad parts of Wall Street. Even Larry Fink deserves a separate biography, honestly. But XRP also wasn't just creating tethers at the time, or XRP wasn't. I'm confusing XRP and Ripple, but even Ripple and XRP for a lot of times XRP and Ripple were backing things that weren't, let's say, regulatory, and they weren't really honest. And then they got
Okay.
some government support. And again, to say that they were corrupt and that everything in the government was corrupt, I can't say that. But I have to ask how it got through so easily.
Right.
I don't know all the questions, but I know there was a lot you could say that now we've looked through it more carefully. I don't think having Larry Summers' name attached to something or Sam Bankman-Fried's name attached to something makes it better or worse. And again, that's just my personal bias from having. I never worked with Sam Bankman-Fried. I knew of Larry Summers at Harvard. I'm not going to risk slander here or anything, but I just because he's a part of something or Schmidt or anyone else doesn't make me think it's better. Let's just put it that way. But I think they're trying to get more credibility now. I think they're trying to get more mainstream. I think having Elon Musk on Doge or Elon Musk on attacking the very good reasons to attack USAID, but there's more to it than just the headlines. There's more to it than just the instant gratification, the sugar high of the good things that are happening there, because there are other things that aren't so good. And so it gets really complicated. But I guess that's a long answer to a short question. I don't think XRP is a white wedding, so to speak, or
Right.
a pure America first, democracy leaning, freedom leading, free price discovery, capitalism wins above all else bastion. I think there's
Yeah.
such a trend towards centralization behind good and bad headlines every single day. And again, not to poke fun at the sugar high of the excitement of a post-Trump election. There's certainly more disruption, more activity, more hope, more of a bull in a china shop than we ever saw in the last 4 years of somnambulism under the Biden administration. But I'm asking Americans, left, right, or center, to get past partisanship, to get past whether they think someone's a hero or a goat, and just think about history and centralization and debt. Think about that we're 40 trillion in debt very soon. No one's going to be buying our IOUs, our US treasuries. Whether you think tariffs are good or bad, I can make a case for both. The simple fact is Japan, China, central banks of the world, they're moving away from the US Treasury. They're stacking physical gold, whether they're BRICS or not. They don't trust us since we weaponized the dollar against Putin, whether you like him or not. I'm saying get past all of that. Ask yourself a very simple question. Who is going to buy Uncle Sam's IOUs, whether Trump's in the White House or not? And how is that going to be done when we're basically sanctioning other countries for not complying with us through tariffs? So again, it's not pro or anti-Trump. We have a bigger problem. We're trying to dislodge ourselves. We're saving money at Doge. We're cutting this corruption at USAID. Elon's going to save us. Trump cares. It may all be true, but even if they're
Yeah.
successful, it doesn't change the fact that we're already over the cliff in debt. We're already in a
Yeah.
recession. Our currency is already distrusted. We are desperate. We are going to have to roll over 10 trillion in debt in the next couple of years. No one is buying our US treasuries, no matter what we do with Bitcoin or what we do, good or bad, with Doge or USAID or the Department of Education or tariffs, whether they work or don't work. We are still screwed. We are
Yeah.
mathematically. We have three choices. We can default on our debt, which we won't because we can have a money printer. We can always add a zero to our balance sheet. We can come up with a productivity miracle. We can't do that mathematically. David Hume and Reinhardt and Rogoff taught us that once your debt to GDP goes past 100%, you can't get growth. It's like swimming with, a cannon on your back. Or we can inflate or die. We're going to inflate our way out of this debt crisis, as every nation from ancient Rome to today, throughout history, without exception, has always done. And so that's
Mhm.
the real issue. Whether you love or hate Trump, wish you had Biden back or Harris, it doesn't matter. Whether you love or hate Elon Musk or Vivek or Tulsi Gabbard, who I really love, all these people are doing great things. They mean it. There's a great momentum, but doesn't change the fact that we're already
Right.
terminally ill. We're already heading for trouble. And again, that's why Bitcoin as the anti-fiat story is working. But really, throughout history, from ancient Rome to today, gold is getting the last laugh. It may not rise as fast, it may not be as profitable as Bitcoin, but it'll certainly get the last laugh. It already is. And that's not a pro gold selling your book, it's history. It's math.
It's
Look at our
history.
COMEX market. Look at our US Treasury market. Look what's happening on the New York exchanges in London. The world is going to physical gold and going away from US Treasuries. That's what happens when
Yeah.
your debt is so embarrassing that even the US, home of the world reserve currency, and its currency is not trusted like it used to be because we have a debt addiction. Left, right, and center has
Yeah.
ruined our country since 1971. So that's the real problem. All the rest, even the debate about Bitcoin, with all due respect, is fog because we're already terminally ill. And no matter what we do with cutting
Yeah.
spending, it's too late now, in my opinion. Doesn't mean the end of the world, doesn't mean the end of the dollar. It does mean more centralization masquerading as libertarianism or America firstism. But whether their
Yeah.
intentions are good or bad, it's just fog because we're broke.
It's happening.
It's happening.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what I see. So,
Well,
yeah,
Matt, I
that's.
think what you just laid out, I think, is incredible. And I think it's going to be very eye opening for a lot of our viewers who already
Mhm,
know pieces of this. But I
mhm,
think, what you just mapped out is really helpful.
mhm.
As we wrap up, final words. Now that people are seeing this picture, asking these questions,
Mhm.
What would you say you would want those viewers to do? What can people
Mhm.
do to
Mhm.
protect themselves, or are we just doomed for a digital gulag?
Yeah, we talked about this before in our conversation. First of all, the first thing I would always say, of course, and I don't mean this Pollyannaishly, be very curious, be healthily skeptical rather than pathologically skeptical. Be very skeptical about what I say. I spent a lot of time trying to understand Bitcoin because I didn't like it and I wanted to understand it. I spent a lot of time trying to go against gold because I would liked it too much. I guess that's the law school background I have, trying to come up with any case, pro or con,
Right.
plaintiff or defense. But really be curious and be informed. Don't get your information from a tweet attention span. It takes more than 500 word count. It takes more than one blog on Zero Hedge or one interview. It takes reading books like John Perkins' Confession of an International Hitman. It takes books like The Creature from Jekyll Island. Go read a pro
Hmm.
Bitcoin book. Go read a book by Larry Summers or Schmidt. Go ahead, or understand, central banks, the pros and the cons. Read The Alchemist. Go for it. Read about Bernanke saving the world, why he got a Nobel Prize, but do skeptically. Read about the gold
Yeah.
case, the pros and cons. There are many to be had. I've looked at them carefully. It doesn't solve
Hmm.
all things, but so the answer to your question is be curious for one thing,
Yeah.
and don't just be angry or emotional. In terms of what you can do to protect yourself, you can't save the world probably. You can't save your government or your state or elect the only congressman. I prefer Scott Besson over Janet Yellen. I absolutely prefer Tulsi Gabbard over who she's replaced. So, but that doesn't mean they're going to save us all, and
Correct.
be okay with that. What you can do, as you and I talked about before this, doesn't mean give up on trying to help one person at a time see things differently, or at least question things differently. Don't mean be dogmatic and give the answer. But what you can do is make yourself safer, make yourself
Hmm.
saner by being informed rather than emotional. It'll keep you from losing your mind during all this centralization. What we went through with COVID to today, we've all been through an intellectual holocaust of lies, I believe. We're all kind of dealing with that. But before you just get angry or emotional, protect yourself with sound money. If you think that's Bitcoin, go for it. I don't think it
Hmm.
is at all. If you think it's gold, trust it, be informed. If you're looking for a government to save you, I'm sorry, it's probably not going to happen no matter who's elected, good or bad. You can still save yourself the best way you can with your thinking, with your friendships, with your circles, with your curiosity, and with
Yeah.
raising tough questions to people who will try to answer them. If you don't trust them, don't give them your vote, don't give them your
Hmm.
faith. But you can give that to your friends and family. Create your own circles, not just circles where you all agree, but where you can have a debate and disagree without getting disrespectful. I could
Yeah.
talk to someone pro Bitcoin all day long. I don't think you have to fight or insult each other. And that doesn't help. Or I could be pro Trump or pro Harris. We shouldn't have to hate each other. I could
Hmm.
be pro American or pro French. We shouldn't have to get into a culture war. So I'm just saying that's what's really breaking down. There's so
Yeah.
much frustration, so much rage that you can't have a good, intelligent debate anymore. You're self censoring or you're
Hmm.
afraid. You can't answer hard questions. I wish we could get back to those days, but you can create your own
Yeah.
circles of that. So be curious, be respectful, question yourself, and at some point, stand up for your own conviction. For God's sakes, if you really believe something, just say it. But just make sure it's got some
Yeah.
footnotes. Have the receipts, is the new trend now. Show your receipts. That's my advice. Mm.
I love it. And it's a lot of work. It's not as easy. So,
No,
people have their
no,
homework. They know what they
yeah,
need to do, but I
yeah.
think all solid, sound advice. So we thank you so much. Remind people how they can find you, find out more
Mhm.
about you and what you do at Von Greyerz.
Yeah, so Egon von Greyerz is my colleague and partner at von Greyerz Gold. We're based out of Zurich. We have vaults in Zurich and in Singapore and in the Swiss Alps. And we have a lot of articles and interviews posted on the website, a lot of free education on gold
Mhm.
and risks and jurisdictions and how to hold gold and how not to hold gold. And that's at vongreyers.gold or goldswitzerland.com. And there's a lot of real free information there just to kind of peruse, look at articles, we have a page called Why Gold, which talks about jurisdictions, talks about ETF gold and the risks of bank held gold. I think it's fairly objective, and you don't have to become a client, but you could get a lot of education there for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, Matthew, thank you so much for everything that you and Egon do at Von Greyerz. And thank you so much for joining us today on Collapse Life and having this conversation with us.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, all viewers and listeners. We're so grateful to you as well for joining us. And we hope that you have learned something today. If you did, please share this episode far and wide with others that you know, and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. And if you like what you heard today, you can support us by buying us a coffee. That support means so much to us, and we thank you so much for it. To learn more about us, you can go to collapselife.com and then head back here next week. We'll have another amazing guest, and we look forward to welcoming you. And until then, just remember, keep your chin up. It's only collapse. See you soon.